Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation devoted to the importance of developing public speaking skills in tertiary education. And I'd like to express that we are honored to be here today. I think that our talk, entitled Cross-Border Strategies to Mastering Public Speaking, might be particularly relevant to those of you who teach different courses connected with soft skills, communication, and developing speaking skills in general, no matter what type of school or university you represent or work on. During the next 20 minutes, we will attempt to address the following two issues. First of all, why our students actually need to work on and develop their public speaking skills. And secondly, how and in what ways we, as academic teachers, can help them grow in this regard. In becoming fluent public speakers, presenters, or performers. Now let me begin by briefly saying what we understand through public speaking, how we actually define the term. And let me propose a few tenets. First, public speaking is more about performing than merely speaking. Then it involves some interaction with live audience. Third, it is placed in a given social context. Then it's actually face-to-face type of interaction, although now it's rather not. I need to say I find it extremely difficult to present being framed in a tiny little window on a computer screen. And finally, public speaking is now largely based on visuals. Scientifically speaking, according to Becker's theory of human capital, the sole role of any educational institution, and most of all higher education institutions, is to equip students with a certain set of skills needed or required by prospect employers. It is our role then, as university teachers, to wire our students with a specific mindset that will allow them to find a job, grow professionally, and step up the ladder of success. And how do we do that? Through developing their communicative competence. That belongs to the reign of the so-called soft skills, with public speaking included. Because according to Suleiman, the ability to perform in public is one of the skills needed in a contemporary job market. So summing up, our goal is to educate them so that they become fluent, fully competent communicators. The concept of communicative competence, coined by Hymes, is still on. Let me briefly remind you that it was created in opposition to Chomsky's linguistic competence, with the emphasis placed on knowledge versus performance. And now we know it takes more than merely knowledge of the rules of a given language to communicate. Now I believe that what Hymes means or meant at that time is just right. Building communicative competence is an approach to understanding what factors contribute to forming optimal human relationships in multiple social interactions, including public speaking, of course. How do we define a competent communicator that is supposed to be the end product of every endeavor at the university? We need to mold or shape people who are not afraid of standing in front of a crowd of people, no matter they are a group of friends, a group of subordinates, a random audience in a remote country like Japan, for example. Yes, I believe a fully competent communicator can handle that and knows how to invite questions in Japanese culture, for example. That sounds ambitious, right? Popel defines communicative competence as an ability to employ both linguistic and non-linguistic means of communication simultaneously in different social contexts and interactions under certain provisions. Due to time restrictions, let me cut this long story short and just say that communicative competence, as we see it, is simply the practical ability to use verbal and non-verbal communication in an appropriate way, which means fitting the context. knowing the requirements typical of a given social interaction, governing the given social interaction, or typical of a given cultural background. Running such courses as public speaking or communication in organizations or intercultural communication, talking about speaking and public speaking, we resort to different course books and guides and other resources. The point is that most of these books concentrate on teaching relevant vocabulary and the structure. And that sounds right, and that sounds fair, because in order to master your presentation skills, you need some structure and some framework, and also mere phraseology. That is why we assume that some basics of classical rhetoric that will be further discussed by my colleague Dr. Bielak seem vital. Before we move on, the initial assumption is that by far and large, the role of university is to help students become fluent and competent speakers, performers. However, in this very presentation, we can only concentrate on one single chosen particular aspect of mastering public speaking skills. It is the structure, introduction, the body of the presentation, and some logical conclusions. We want our students to be able to do at least that through a coherent logical presentation which takes some preparation and which has a solid structure. And now Dr. Bielak will take over and elaborate on some more pragma-rhetorical aspects of speech structuring.
Rhetoric is the art of speech preparation and delivery, which dates back to ancient times. Its primary assumptions have remained unchanged to the present times and are still applied. The stages of speech preparation and delivery are included in the 5 canons of rhetoric: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. Since in this speech it is the canon of arrangement that is of vital importance, it will be this canon that will be presented in some greater detail. The canon of arrangement consists of ordering the material gathered with reference to 5 parts of a speech. Exordium, introduction. At this stage, credibility is established, the topic and goals of a speech are presented, and listeners' attention is caught. Narratio, logical and clear presentation of information. Divisio partitio, the overview of the primary arguments, issues. Argumentatio, that is split into confirmatio, confirmation of the information from narratio or partitio, and refutatio, disconfirmation of contradictory views. Conclusio peroratio, conclusion, which is marked by a signal to your audience that one is about to present the concluding part. At this stage, the main issues of the speech are reviewed in a memorable way. The effect of conclusion is reinforced if the speech ends with a statement of vital importance, which inspires listeners to take action. In contemporary rhetoric, the canon of arrangement is frequently simplified. It has a 3-part structure: introduction, body, and conclusion. Significantly, the content of each part may vary from author to author. Notably, it is the proposal by Morgan which may be viewed as an example of a universal idea. According to Morgan, 2008, the content of a speech consists of the introduction, in which the goals and major points of a speech are presented and listeners' attention is aroused; the body, which consists of the discussion of the primary points; and the conclusion, where one reviews the content of the presentation and encourages listeners to take action. The research part is based on the analysis of public speeches of 4 Anglo-Saxon politicians: Boris Johnson, Kamala Harris, Nigel Farage, Barack Obama, in terms of the canon of arrangement. The research seeks to answer the following research questions. In what practical ways might students benefit from being acquainted with numerous examples of speeches made by political leaders, regarded professional, fully competent public performers? With reference to what aspects can higher education students rest their canon of arrangement on the politicians' speeches? Can the speeches analyzed in the research become a source of inspiration, reflecting on the structure of the speech that comes useful for the prospect self-development in the area of public speaking. Aspects to be evaluated in terms of the arrangement canon are presented in the table that can be seen on the slide. In the introduction, the elements to be examined are presenting the topic and goals of the speech, establishing credibility, and previewing the main points. In the body, the elements subject to analysis include presentation of the main points, logical development of thought, and adequate use of transition words. In the conclusion, the elements that will be examined are signaling the concluding part of the speech, memorable and forceful review of the main issues, a sentence of great significance, which ends the speech. The elements of the arrangement canon represent a part of the public presentation tool by Urbaniak and Bielak 2021. The analysis of the speeches by Kamala Harris and Boris Johnson shows that the introduction in general is not based on the typical rhetoric structure. The part devoted to previewing the main points is not existent. The presentation of the topic and goals of the speech is not based on typical rhetoric assumptions. The body consists of the presentation of the main points, and the content of the speech is based on the logical development of thought. However, the criterion of the adequate use of transition words is realized only to some extent. The conclusion has a different structure than what is recommended by rhetoric. There is no clear signal that shows the beginning of the conclusion. There is no memorable and forceful review of the main issues. Notably, the element that is conspicuous in the speeches under analysis is the statement of great significance, which ends the speech. What must be emphasized is that in the introduction, credibility is established by developing rapport with the audience via greeting them. In the case of Kamala Harris, it is "Good morning to everyone," "Good evening," "Greetings America," and Boris Johnson, "Good morning," "Hi, hi, hi, hi," "Good morning everybody," "Good afternoon." Rapport with the audience is also created via non-verbal communication. A vital role is played by the face and figure expressing expertise, which inspires trust. Rapport with the audience is also created via a vibrant smile, in the case of Kamala Harris, and in the case of Boris Johnson, his hairstyle, which arouses fondness. Credibility is also established by showing respect to the audience via saying, in the case of Kamala Harris, "It is my honor to be here, to stand on the shoulders of those who came before, to speak tonight as your Vice President," or "It is a joy and honor to be with you today here in Singapore." And in the case of Boris Johnson, "Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for joining us." As already mentioned in the speeches under analysis, one generally identifies no typical introduction characteristic of rhetoric. Instead, we have the presentation of some context with reference to which the main problem of the speech is introduced. To exemplify, Kamala Harris in her speech in Singapore on the US vision for the Indo-Pacific region first refers to the situation in Afghanistan and the support they received inter alia from Singapore. The above reference leads to the main issue. Our partnerships in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, and throughout the Indo-Pacific are a top priority for the United States. As already stated in the speeches under analysis, one generally identifies some context that leads to the introduction of the main issue of the speech. However, there are some exceptions. To exemplify, Boris Johnson's statement at coronavirus press conference on the 5th of July 2021 begins with the clear presentation of the topic. It is not preceded by any context. That is, "I want to set out what our lives would be like from the 19th of this month, which is only a few days away, if And when we move to step 4, a decision will finally take on the 12th. And I want to stress from the outset that this pandemic is far from over, and it would certainly not be over by the 19th. As already stated, the body is based on the presentation of the main ideas and logical development of thought. To exemplify, this is the list of the main points introduced in Boris Johnson's statement at coronavirus press conference on the 5th of July 2021, whose order of introduction is logically developed. In order for the speech to go smoothly, public speaking courses advise students to refer to linking words. Such words are so numerous that they are usually classified into a number of groups. When one analyzes the transition words used in the speeches by Boris Johnson and Kamala Harris, one can clearly notice that the selection of the transition words made is not exceedingly wide. In the case of Kamala Harris, we can point to such words as and, because, yet, but, at the same time. In the case of Boris Johnson, the list is a little longer, but does not exhaust all options. All in all, one cannot identify such characteristic linking words as, for example, particularly, furthermore, in addition, conversely, alternatively, subsequently, therefore, last but not least, however, consequently. As already mentioned, in the analyzed speeches, there is no typical conclusion characteristic of rhetoric. There is some context provided that introduces foundations for a concluding statement of great significance, which encourages listeners to act. To exemplify, in Boris Johnson's statement at coronavirus press conference on the 12th of July 2021, there are references to vaccination as a protective measure, which lead to the concluding sentence. So please get that jab.
Thank you, Dr. Bielak, for your contribution. Since we are running out of time, let me just briefly comment on two more political leaders whose speeches we analyzed for the purpose of this research, namely Nigel Farage and Barack Obama. In both, we could find some non-standard ways of opening presentations as well as the standardized forms of addressing the audiences. As for the presentation of the main points, it has been observed that professionals rarely use standard phrases and they rather resort to other techniques allowing them to present the main points and connect them. In concluding parts, both Farage and Obama were able to use some memorable, forceful statements. However, no reviewing part as such was ever present. Depending on the level of formality, the speeches started either with simple good evening, everybody, or a traditional formalized forms of address like Mr. President or Madam President. It needs to be observed that Mr. Farage was found to be way more likely to use non-standard ways of opening his speeches, starting, for example, with "Isn't it funny?" That might simply create interest on the side of the audience. As for the body of the presentation, it has been observed that Mr. Farage reveals a tendency to employ a certain strategy to logically knit the ideas and the points in his speeches. It is achieved through repetition. We have fought against, which is repeated multiple times. The conclusions are usually strong and memorable, including non-verbal elements such as waving flags while leaving European Union, which the trick that was played and used by Mr. Farage and his political companion. Mr. Obama tended to finish with a rather standardized form of God Bless America that can be visible in multiple contexts. And as for the final conclusion, it might be said that a clear presentation needs a clear structure. It should be prepared, it should be rehearsed, and shall definitely lead you somewhere and leave you with a strong message, something to remember. Does it require some specific genetic propensities to become a competent speaker? That remains an open question. However, for sure, it takes a lot of preparation and a lot of hard work to become one. And I would like to finish and leave you with a Latin statement saying that one is born a poet, but one definitely needs practice to become a speaker. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I will slowly scroll down through the reference lists, and should you have any questions regarding our work, please don't hesitate to ask questions directly after the presentation, or you can contact us via email. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.